So imagine you are standing there in just absolute solitary silence. You are facing a perfectly blank 50 by 70 canvas.
Oh, that is just the most intimidating feeling.
Right. It is just this pristine rectangle. The weave of the fabric is basically staring back at you, practically daring you to make a move.
Yeah, the pressure is wild. Welcome to the deep dive, by the way. I'm thrilled to be here as your resident art specialist today.
And I am your host, and today our mission is really daunting. We are talking about painting a human portrait so hyper-realistic that, it feels like it might actually draw a breath.
Exactly. And your survival instinct in that moment, like your visual brain just screams at you to grab black paint to carve out the shadows.
Yes, and white paint to just blast in the highlights, right?
Yeah.
You just want to anchor the image somehow.
You do. But the documentation we are looking at today reveals that, well, taking that instinctual path practically guarantees a lifeless painting.
Which is wild, because achieving true biological resonance on canvas actually begins with zero black or white paint. None at all.
None.
Yeah.
No.
And the most crucial tool you need for this first step is actually, believe it or not, a hairdryer.
I mean, it completely shatters that romanticized image of the painter, doesn't it?
It really does.
Like, we are so culturally conditioned to imagine the artist in this, flurry of unrestrained inspiration, wielding sable brushes and a messy wooden palette.
Yeah, just throwing paint everywhere. But what we are analyzing today from the materials provided by GRUPO RAIIM is just a total deconstruction of that myth.
Absolutely, because Laura Palacios, she approaches the canvas not with chaotic passion, but with the calculated precision of, like, an optical engineer.
Right. It is this meticulous, step-by-step architectural build where the behavior of photons and the chemistry of polymers are manipulated to simulate living, breathing tissue.
And the mission of this deep dive is to decode that exact methodology. We want to take you inside the rigorous system behind hyperrealism.
So the goal is that the next time you're standing in a gallery looking at a masterwork, you aren't just seeing a flat image. You'll understand you are experiencing a three-dimensional illusion.
Yeah, an illusion driven by light, physically traveling through microscopic layers of matter. It is fascinating.
It is, but to understand how that illusion is built, we have to, go back to the terror of that blank white canvas.
Oh, the dreaded blank canvas.
Because the overwhelming anxiety to just cover that white space drives beginners to make a catastrophic structural mistake right out of the gate.
They do. They grab their pigment, flood it with water to make a really thin wash, and just scrub it all over the canvas, just to kill the white.
Just to get rid of it.
Yeah, they're acting on this psychological need to feel like the painting has, officially started.
But by throwing down that watery wash, they are completely ignoring the physical properties of the surface they're actually working on.
Right, because a canvas is essentially a woven grid of microscopic fibers. So when you apply a highly diluted watery base, that fluid absorbs into the fabric in an entirely chaotic way.
Capillary action just pulls the water in consistently.
Exactly. And as it dries, you are left with this microscopic landscape where some pores are completely sealed, while literally millimeters away, the fibers remain wide open and thirsty.
So you are effectively trying to build a skyscraper on a swamp.
I love that analogy. Yes. A total swamp.
If the foundation is porous and chemically unstable, like the architecture you stack on top of it is doomed.
It is doomed, because when you lay down subsequent layers of paint over that watery base, the fresh paint just sinks unevenly into those open pores.
The layers bleed into each other, right?
Yeah, you lose all control of the pigment's boundaries. It creates this muddy, uncontrollable visual swamp where the paint loses all its refractive qualities. It just goes dead.
Which is awful.
Yeah.
But the maestra eliminates that foundational instability on day one.
She does. Her professional method requires an absolute unyielding standard for the initial ground layer.
Right. Working on a professional-grade Phoenix box canvas, which gives this rigid, deeply tensioned surface, she applies a completely homogeneous, exceptionally thick layer of paint.
And there is zero water involved, like none.
None. It is a dense, opaque mixture of titanium white and yellow ochre.
She is essentially paving the canvas with concrete.
Yeah, and the physical logic here is just brilliant. Titanium white is it is one of the most opaque, highly refractive pigments available.
Right, so by mixing it into a thick paste with the yellow ochre and basically troweling it across the surface, she is sealing every single microscopic valley in the canvas weave.
She stops the capillary action entirely. the swamp is paved over.
Exactly. And she is left with a perfectly stable, impermeable, brightly lit foundation. Light hitting the surface won't get trapped in the fabric. It will bounce right back out.
The structural integrity is flawless, but, it introduces a massive perceptual paradox.
Oh, a huge one.
We have just engineered an impenetrable, flat, yellowish wall of acrylic polymer. Yet the final objective is to render human skin.
And biological tissue is the exact opposite of an impenetrable wall.
Right. Skin is translucent. It has depth. It breathes. It reveals the blood pumping beneath it.
Yeah. That is the ultimate tension of the process, isn't it? How do you pull a living organic form out of a rigid yellow wall?
The instinct to fix this flat surface is to just immediately start carving out the anatomy. Like you think, grab the pure white tube to build the bridge of the nose.
Yeah, and grab the pure black tube to sink the eye sockets.
But that results in the visual equivalent of a plastic mannequin, right?
It totally does. Relying on pure black and pure white to establish form at this stage strips all the thermal temperature out of the portrait.
It yields a grayish, ashen quality. The subject looks entirely devoid of blood circulation.
Like a zombie.
Exactly. And this is where the methodology makes a radical pivot. The Gran Artista does not use a single drop of black or white to build the entire initial volume of the face.
Not one drop. She maps out the complex topography of the anatomy using a classical technique known as a brunette.
But she executes it using only one single color, right? Burnt sienna.
Yes. It is this incredibly rich, warm, reddish-brown earth pigment.
And the reliance on a single monochromatic pigment forces a complete shift in how the volume is constructed.
It really does. You are no longer establishing shadows by mixing darker colors on your palette.
You are creating the entire illusion of three-dimensional space by modulating the concentration of that one pigment using only water.
It is an exercise in the extreme control of fluid dynamics.
It is like she is essentially performing a monumental symphony using a single cello.
Oh, that is a great way to put it.
Yeah, you have no brass section, no percussion to hide behind. You have to create the sweeping emotional highs and the devastating lows strictly by modulating the pressure of the bow against the strings.
And in this method, the bow pressure is the water ratio.
Right. High water concentration spreads the burnt sienna so thin it becomes a transparent veil that allows the bright yellow ochre foundation to shine through.
And those become the highlights, while pure concentrated pigment with almost no water creates the dense, opaque shadows of an eye socket or the jawline.
The control required to pull that off is just staggering.
It is. But your cello metaphor also highlights a severe mechanical problem with acrylics.
Oh, right. Because if you are building an entire face by stacking highly diluted watery veils of paint on top of each other, you run a massive risk.
The risk of reactivation.
Because if I drag a wet brush over a delicate, semi-transparent layer of acrylic that hasn't fully cured, the water is going to dissolve the underlying polymer.
Exactly. I mean, you are going to rip a hole right through the painting and end up back in the swamp.
You are literally painting with a puddle.
And that is exactly where the hairdryer steps in.
Right. It is not an eccentricity at all. It is a vital tool of optical engineering.
Yes, because acrylic emulsions consist of pigment particles and polymer spheres suspended in water. As long as the water is present, the paint is vulnerable.
So the Meister uses the hairdryer to force the immediate evaporation of that water.
Right. The moment the water leaves, the polymer spheres smash together and lock the pigment into an irreversible plastic film.
By flash drying every single layer within seconds, she prevents the veils from bleeding into mud.
And more importantly, it sustains her flow state. She doesn't have to break her concentration waiting for the chemistry to settle.
So the anatomy is locked in. The volume is completely established in this warm, breathing sienna. The cello has played its solo.
Beautifully played, too.
But to push this into the realm of hyperrealism, the extremes need to be established. We need to deepen the pupils, define the dark hair, and, drop in those razor-sharp specular highlights.
Like the moisture on the lower eyelid or the oily reflection on the tip of the nose.
Right. Now, my instinct for efficiency says if I need a darker shadow, I should take the burnt sienna on my palette, squeeze a drop of black next to it, mix them together with my brush, and just apply it. I mean, it takes 3 seconds.
I know, but mechanical efficiency is the absolute enemy of optical luminosity here.
Why is that?
Because when you physically mix a dark pigment into the burnt sienna on a wooden palette, you are forcing the pigment particles to bind together into a dense, muddy paste.
So you're basically creating a visual black hole.
Precisely. When you apply that physically mixed paste to the canvas, it acts as a light trap.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the ambient light from the gallery hits that dense shadow and is instantly absorbed by the chaotic mix of particles. The light just dies.
So the resulting shadow looks entirely flat and lifeless.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It reads to the human eye like a stain sitting on top of the canvas rather than a natural recession into biological space.
And I imagine the same failure happens with highlights.
It does. If you take a thick blob of pure white straight from the tube and dot it onto the eye, it doesn't look like moisture reflecting the room.
It looks like a sticker of correction fluid floating artificially over the painting.
Yes, a literal sticker. So the rule established by GRUPO RAIIM for this phase is absolute. Palette mixing for extreme shadows is strictly forbidden.
Forbidden. So how does she drop the value of the shadows then?
She relies on specific browns and darks, specifically raw umber and Payne's gray.
Oh, okay. Raw umber and Payne's gray.
Right, but she doesn't mix them into the sienna on the palette. She applies them as independent, highly diluted glazes.
Ah, glazes. And for the highlights, there is no pure tube white either.
None. She glazes on a warm white, which is a delicate mix of titanium and ochre, so thin that it integrates seamlessly into the topography beneath it.
This separation of layers is really what defines true optical engineering in painting.
It is. It is the core of the illusion.
It functions exactly like the stained glass windows in a Gothic cathedral.
Oh, I like that. How so?
Well, if the Gran Artista has a dried, locked layer of burnt sienna on the canvas, she glazes a transparent, microscopic sheet of Payne's gray over the top of it.
Okay, I see where you're going.
Because the layers are physically separated by the acrylic and polymer, the ambient light in the room actually travels through the dark, transparent layer.
Yes. It physically hits the red sienna pigment particles embedded below.
Right, and then bounces back, traveling through the dark layer a second time before hitting your retina.
It is incredible. The colors never physically touched on the artist's palette. The mixing happens optically entirely inside the viewer's brain.
Because the photons are actually traveling through physical depth, the human eye perceives a shadow that vibrates with atmosphere. It literally possesses ambient temperature.
And that physical journey of light through the polymer is the singular reason the painted skin appears to have a pulse.
We are talking about manipulating the trajectory of photons through microscopic sheets of plastic. It is just brilliant.
It really is.
But anyone who knows traditional painting techniques is likely screaming a very specific question right now.
Oh, I know exactly what question you mean.
Yeah, because the old masters built these same optical glazes centuries ago. So why couldn't someone just execute this rapid-fire, hairdryer-driven glazing system using classic oil paints?
That is the big question. To answer that, we have to look at the violent friction between the RAIIM methodology and the foundational chemistry of linseed oil.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, acrylics, as we established, dry through evaporation. The water leaves, the plastic locks. It is a mechanical action that happens in minutes or seconds with a hairdryer.
Right, but oils do not contain water.
Exactly. They cure through oxidation.
So the oil has to absorb oxygen from the ambient air to undergo a chemical cross-linking process.
Right. It slowly transforms from a liquid fat into a solid polymer network. And we all know the cardinal rule of oil painting that addresses this, right?
Fat over lean.
Fat over lean. The lower layers of an oil painting must be lean, meaning thinned with solvents so they oxidize and harden quickly.
And as you build upward, the layers must become increasingly fat, containing more oil, which takes much longer to cure, sometimes months or years.
So if you attempt to force the maestra's rapid glazing technique using oils, you are inverting the chemical laws of the medium.
Let's visualize the physics of that failure because it is intense. Imagine you have a thick, fat layer of oil paint on the canvas. It is fresh, gelatinous, and slowly absorbing oxygen.
Okay, setting the scene.
Now, you glaze a thin, lean layer over the top of it, and you try to force it dry. You are basically laying a sheet of brittle glass over a bed of moving jelly.
Oh, that sounds like a disaster. The microscopic shear forces at play there are catastrophic.
Exactly. The lean top layer oxidizes quickly, forming a rigid skin. But beneath that skin, the fat layer is still chemically active.
It is expanding and contracting as it attempts to cure, and the rigid top layer just cannot flex to accommodate the kinetic movement of the gelatinous layer beneath it.
The structural tension builds until the painting physically shatters. The top layer fractures, creating deep, irreversible spiderweb cracks across the portrait.
The painting essentially destroys itself from the inside out.
It does. And this proves that the reliance on acrylics in the GRUPO RAIIM method isn't just a stylistic preference, or, a matter of convenience.
No, the acrylic emulsion is an absolute chemical imperative.
Right. It is the only material that allows for this rapid, high-velocity stacking of optical glazes without inducing a slow-motion structural collapse.
The methodology relies on a perfect synergy. The artist's demand for continuous momentum requires a material that can halt time instantly.
And the acrylic polymer provides the stability, while the hairdryer acts as the catalyst, allowing the optical architecture to rise without structurally compromising the foundation.
This entirely recontextualizes what we're looking at when we view a portrait, doesn't it?
It really strips away the myth of the tortured genius splashing colors until a face magically appears.
Right, because what you are actually witnessing is a rigorous, unforgiving science. It requires the immense patience of Laura Palacios to understand the behavior of polymers.
The mathematics of evaporation and the subtractive physics of light.
Exactly. That patience, that deliberate stacking of microscopic glass over microscopic glass, is the sole reason the final portrait is capable of holding a breath.
And, when you understand the sheer physical mass involved in this optical engineering, it provides a really fascinating counter-narrative to something else happening right now.
What's that?
The current explosion of AI-generated art.
Oh, that is a compelling pivot. Because the latent diffusion models are generating hyper-realistic human faces in seconds right now.
Exactly. How do you see the methodology contrasting with that?
Well, think about it. An AI algorithm renders a portrait by calculating pixel values and dropping them onto a flat two-dimensional digital grid.
Right. There is no Phoenix canvas.
No canvas. There is no concrete foundation of titanium white and yellow ochre blocking the capillary action.
There are no microscopic transparent sheets of burnt sienna waiting for room light to activate them.
Exactly. An AI image lacks any physical depth of field. It is entirely additive light. LEDs pushing flat illumination directly into your eyes from a screen.
But the Meister's method relies on subtractive light, utilizing the actual atmosphere of the room to dive into the physical matter of the painting and bounce back out.
And the algorithm just cannot replicate the tangible chemistry of that optical soul.
It really is the difference between a simulation of light and the physical trapping of light.
Which is a profound difference.
It is. And that distinction leaves us with a really lingering question to ponder long after we wrap up here.
What are you thinking?
Well, if the true psychological impact of hyperrealism depends entirely on the ambient light of the real world, physically traveling through microscopic layers of tangible matter, what does that mean for the impending future of virtual reality galleries?
Oh, wow. Yeah. As we are increasingly pushed toward experiencing art through VR headsets or, digital holograms.
Exactly. Are we going to lose the optical engineering that makes a masterpiece breathe? Will the flat saturation of the digital age eventually force us to return to physical brick-and-mortar museums?
Just driven by a biological craving to experience how real light bounces off a real meticulously engineered canvas? That is a heavy thought.
It forces us to question the medium as much as the image.
It is a great reminder to never take the surface of what we are looking at for granted.
Absolutely. So keep questioning the layers behind everything you see, whether it's physical paint or digital pixels. We will catch you on the next deep dive.